I find the issue of Mike Amesbury really difficult to deal with, and I've made at least one film today about it because I'm trying to sort of I'm trying to think my way through this issue, I'm sorry if I'm using YouTube as a way to process thought, but it's like thinking aloud, and I suppose in some ways it's also deeply British what's happened. Our ability to turn justice into an absurd farce that even Kafka might find a bit heavy-handed. We like to think that in a fair and civilized society, punishment fits the crime. You think of the Mikado. That a crime of violence is more severe than a crime of words, for example. That our justice system operates on some logical continuum rather than rather than some sort of impulse that because somebody has privilege, they get a different treatment. We think that the logic of the worse offence produces the worst consequence. Unfortunately, we appear to have abandoned this notion in favour of a system where punching someone in broad daylight or in the night in full view of cameras is less serious than typing something regrettable on the internet, and where a 70-year-old climate protester can be given extra time in prison because the government couldn't find an appropriately shaped electronic tag. So, beginning with Mike Amesbury, this disgraced Labour MP, on Monday he was sentenced to 10 weeks in prison for beating up a constituent in the street. And I think that seems perfectly reasonable. I think we'd agree that's the appropriate way forward. And given the serious nature of the offence, an elected official assaulting a member of the public, caught on camera, one might expect an appropriately stern sentence. One might also expect Parliament to throw him out of the chamber. But no. Following an appeal, Amesbury will now serve no actual time behind bars. He's done 3 days. That's supposed to be shock enough to his system. His punishment, a suspended sentence. In essence, a judicial equivalent of "don't do it again, old chap." Contrast this with Lucy Connelly, a childminder, the wife of a Tory councillor who last year tweeted something genuinely appalling about asylum seekers in the wake of the Southport murders and the Southport riots, and her tweet was vile, it was reprehensible, it was indefensible, but was it, one wonders, 13 times worse than physically attacking someone who has elected you as the MP to represent them? Because that's precisely what the justice system has now decided. Lucy Connelly was sentenced to 2 years and 7 months in prison, 13 times the length of Amesbury's original sentence, and more than 60 times the length of the actual time that he has served. So one might reasonably ask, if Amesbury had simply tweeted that he wished he had beaten up a constituent rather than actually doing it, would he have received a harsher punishment? And conversely, had Connelly gone out and actually physically attacked an asylum seeker, might she have received a dramatically lighter sentence? And if that is the case, do we now live in a Britain where the best way to avoid legal trouble is simply to act on one's worst impulses, smash someone in the head, rather than expressing these darker impulses online? It's as simple as that. And then we turn to Guy Dillap, the 78-year-old retired teacher and climate protester, who was sentenced to 20 months in prison for participating in a Just Stop Oil protest. Now, after serving part of her sentence, as much of her sentence that most people would normally have to serve, she was granted release under the Home Detention Curfew, the HDC scheme, which allows prisoners to serve the remainder of their sentence under electronic monitoring. However, a problem emerged. Because of a history of deep vein thrombosis, she couldn't have a tag fitted to her ankle. And for reasons best known to bureaucratic oblivion, the government couldn't locate a wrist tag that fitted her wrist. Now, a rational system might have considered alternative arrangements, perhaps a parole officer or a different form of monitoring, because it's unlikely that she was going to be a flight risk. or that she was going to go around the place and cause genuine damage to anyone. Instead, the response was to send her back to prison because the state lacked the ability to supply her with a tag that fitted. It wasn't as if this was a new idea. They had enough months to do some rooting around and find an appropriate tag. And if that wasn't absurd enough, she had an extra 20 days added to her sentence, not for a crime, not for breaking parole, not for fleeing the country, but because she stayed at home waiting for the authorities to sort out their own administrative incompetence. Extraordinary. So just to clarify, if you beat someone up in broad daylight, you can appeal your way out of prison. If you send an offensive tweet, you go to jail for years. If your leg is the wrong shape, you serve additional time. You might think I'm joking, but astonishingly, this seems to be the actual state of the British judicial system. The British public and people like Nigel Farage have long tried to put forward the idea of a two-tier system. Of course, not exactly what I'm describing, where justice is neither blind nor particularly consistent. Foreign criminals regularly escape deportation for reasons ranging from dietary preferences to nebulous human rights claims. That's the Farage position. A burglar might be given a slap on the wrist, but an old woman with a poorly fitting ankle tag will be hounded by the state with the enthusiasm of a medieval witch trial. That's what I'm looking at. And yet, if you so much as type the wrong thing in a fit of anger, you'll find yourself behind bars for years. If this trend continues, we need to consider the logical implications. Perhaps rather than venting on social media, it would be safer to channel one's frustrations into old-fashioned physical violence. No longer should we consider our fists as the last resort. No, in Britain 2025, they are the more legally prudent alternative. Please note this is sarcastic. I don't normally do sarcasm, so I have to flag it up. And I'm shocked. I am genuinely shocked. I'm dismayed. And I despair. This is not justice. This is not justice. This is some sort of perversity. Those at risk of electronic monitoring should take immediate steps to ensure that their body is sufficiently compatible with government-issued tracking devices. One might soon see a rise in offenders undergoing elective surgery to ensure that their limbs conform to state-mandated specifications. If you want the public to respect the law, then the law must be worthy of respect. And when a system imposes harsher punishments for words than for violence, if a system imposes harsher punishments on somebody who hasn't been an elected official, if a system imposes harsher punishments when bureaucratic failures result in when bureaucracy can't deal with the reality, and that means cruel and pointless incarceration, when ordinary people can't understand the logic behind sentencing, then faith in the system erodes, and we can't expect the public to support the system. This isn't just simply a debate about sentencing, it's about the credibility of the law itself. And if the justice system cannot see the absurdity in its own decisions, then it shouldn't be surprised when the public treats it with the ridicule that it so richly deserves. Let's just put it very simply. When a frail, elderly woman appeals to be let home for Christmas because she merits that under the system, but the system doesn't have an appropriate tag to put on her leg, then surely the system should err in her favour. When a man who has been elected to high office punches one of the people who was part of his constituency, punches one of his constituents, not once, but repeatedly, and swears at him, and all this is caught on camera. Yes, the the camera evidence is just evidence which is submitted to court. The camera evidence is not there. The public are not there to make a judgment, but the public can see that evidence. They can see it. And because this man happens to have been an MP, happens to have got friends in high places, he's let out of prison early. Maybe his foot is the right size. Maybe his leg's the right size. But there's something deeply wrong here, isn't there? There's something that's debased. And maybe we just need to start bribing people. Because I don't see blind justice here. I see the sort of justice that is enmired in some sort of error. I'm not cynical enough at this moment to say that it's corrupt. But it's not consistent, is it?